Thank you very much, Ms. Parks. A pleasant good afternoon to all of you. How we would do it is that I would briefly present some information to you, and then I shall call on Assemblyman Joel Jack to follow, and to follow him would be Assemblyman Marcelin Melville Jack, and to follow her would be Assemblyman Ansel Dennis, after which we shall take your questions. Members of the media and the general public, I take this opportunity to remind us that we continue to be affected by COVID-19, and that in the midst of this global pandemic, governments around the world continue to take action in an attempt to contain the spread of this pandemic. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course the Tobago House of Assembly, continue to monitor the situation and take appropriate measures as we see fit. As I speak to you today, the information that is available to us arising from the latest press conference by the Ministry of Health is that 370 samples have been submitted for testing, and of that, 66 have been proven positive. We continue to urge persons who have traveled recently to stay in isolation, and of course, most importantly, to practice social distancing, staying 3 to 6 feet away from others. In addition, we call on you to continue to practice the hygiene guidelines provided by the Ministry of Health. For those who are traveling or who continue to travel between Trinidad and Tobago, we urge you to travel only for necessary purposes. I wish to remind us that much of the world population are subjected to some sort of movement restrictions. I have been advised that Grenada has recently declared a limited state of emergency. I hope that is accurate, but I've just been informed of that, which underscores the importance of the restriction of movements and for persons to move only when it is necessary. As a matter of fact, you know that as one surveys the world scene, New York, and for us New York, you know, is important because New York has a wide Caribbean diaspora, their situation is reaching alarming proportions. And in fact, I understand that persons are being told, if they were to travel at all, that they should be quarantined wherever they go for a minimum of 14 days. So, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot overemphasize the importance of us adhering to some of these restrictions. We continue to hear and see our residents flouting some of the guidelines. You know, I saw an interesting quote that was sent to me this morning, and I'll share it with you. It says, "The virus does not move. People move it. We stop moving, the virus stops moving, and the virus dies." It's that simple. So I urge us to be particularly careful as we go about our daily lives. But more importantly, the restrictions that we are advised to adhere to, let us stick with those guidelines. I shall speak briefly on what the Division of Education is doing in respect of fostering or encouraging continuing education for our students. Emphasis will be placed on persons who have to do or sit what we call the high-stake exams, SCA, CSEC, and KEEP. And there are programs that are currently available. For instance, the Ministry of Education has an online C program on the national television, TTT. 9:15 a.m., the subject area is mathematics. 11:15 a.m., the subject area is language arts. CNC3 television during the weekdays has programs relating to home tutorials, and 11:05 a.m. to 12 noon, then 12:15 p.m. to 1 p.m., and again 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. There are C classes, SEA classes on IBN television on Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. Pennacool.com has weekly practice tests every Thursday for SEA students. They also have an interactive program, Math for CSEC website. We, at the level of the Division of Education, we are sharing these pieces of information with our teachers and our parents. But in addition to that, we are encouraging our principals and teachers to prepare and distribute learning packages to parents to assist in helping their children. At this time, there are a number of schools, and some further insights into this will be provided via press release on Friday, that are engaged in providing activities, learning activities for the students in the SEA classes. And we are also taking this opportunity to encourage sharing of materials and encouraging collaboration between the teachers of the SEA classes. Generally, there are some schools that have more than one SEA class. So we are saying those teachers, we are encouraging you to collaborate and so on. As well as, so intra-collaboration, as well as we are encouraging inter-collaboration among schools. A group of teachers, not exceeding 9, to begin with, will be meeting at Tittle tomorrow in conjunction with the IT unit there in respect of being oriented and becoming familiar with a platform that is referred to, or that is called Moodle Platform. Now, this is a platform that is characterized or reflects a learning management approach or system, and it's essentially an online educational platform that can offer personalized learning environments for students, and that can be used for both virtual courses and training. The plan is that these teachers will prepare lessons and videos and other learning materials and upload that, or these materials and videos, on this platform, so that our students will have an opportunity, in addition to what I've outlined that is currently available, to engage these interactive online platforms, so that in that sense they are kept current with what is required by the curriculum. As you may know, learning and retention are affected by what is called disuse, so that the idea is to ensure that there is regular use of the information, thereby encouraging what we call recency and frequency, so that whenever school resumes or whenever the exams are due, they will not be disadvantaged. And this is happening not only for our C students, but in respect of this Moodle platform to which I referred a while ago. Secondary school teachers are part of the mix as well. So to facilitate teaching and learning in respect of the curriculum of the secondary schools. Now, the Minister of Social Development had the responsibility to lead a team treating with the issue of school feeding. And just to remind you that the plan that came out of that committee was to make use of food cards. I suspect that the logistics of having students going to some designated spot and so on might have been a little too challenging given the current restrictions on gatherings and that kind of thing. So we have that, and currently we are collating information from the schools in respect of the most needy students. So we're going to collect that information along with data concerning their parents and their contact numbers. And there will be collaboration with the welfare department of the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development as we organize the data, filter the data, and make representations so that the students in Tobago via their parents can access those food cards. So that is the update, ladies and gentlemen, in respect of what we are doing at the level of education for continuing education for our students and seeking to ensure that the benefit that ought to be derived to our students, in fact, do reach them. I am advised that I said 66 COVID cases. My apologies, it's 60. So if I said 66, that's an error. It's 60. Thank you very much. I now ask the Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance to brief you in respect of those matters we discussed at our Executive Council meeting today and the decisions emanating thereof.
Thank you, Chief Secretary, and good afternoon to members of the media. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon. You may recall that it was last Thursday at a press briefing hosted by the Secretary of Health that outlined a number of measures, proposed measures, both by the central government and by the Tobago House of Assembly to treat with the economic challenges as a direct result of the COVID-19 crisis. You may recall that I complimented the government for some of the measures outlined, and I am pleased to announce that some of the measures are indeed, we have put a dollar value to some of them, and taken together with the measures that we discussed today at the Executive Council, I am confident that the Tobago economy will remain resilient and we will weather the challenges of the COVID-19 virus. You may recall as well that I indicated that some of the measures were supported by the two main chambers in Trinidad, the Trinidad and Tobago's Manufacturers Association and the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. And as well, I announced last Thursday that I will be convening a series of meetings with the stakeholders in Tobago, primarily the Tobago chapter of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the tourism stakeholders, and a number and labor, and to continue my dialogue with businessmen in the community to ensure that we maintain a stable environment. I'm pleased to announce that I met with the business community and the tourism stakeholders on Monday, and I outlined a number of measures proposed by the government and as well the policy prescriptions of the Tobago House of Assembly, and they were amenable to them, some of which I will outline in a short while. Additionally, I met with members of the credit union movement shortly before the announcement by the Minister of Finance of the liquidity support program. And let me say that when we started the discussions, I received the support of the movement, and they agreed to their participation as well. They were eager to support the facility, because if you put it in context, remember, outside of government services and government's contribution to GDP, the financial services sector is second, and then third we have the tourism sector. So outside of government's contribution of upwards of 40%, we have the contribution of 24% of the financial services sector and 13% by tourism. And in that 24%, our credit unions manage over $500 million in assets. And that puts it in context as to the assets under management. And we can also appreciate that a number of our credit unions are community-based credit unions, and we want to ensure that the economic fallout is minimized as well. Additionally, as it relates to this special grant facility of $50 million provided by the government to hoteliers, in our preliminary discussions early on Monday, the hoteliers, they were excited about this provision, and they're looking forward to the rollout. In my conversation with the Minister of Finance today, we don't have any timelines as yet, but I'm hoping by next week we will have definitive dates and as to when the program will be rolled out. And the Tobago House of Assembly will be playing an important role in the overall management of that grant facility. Additionally, we discussed the review of the Tourism Loan Guarantee Program, and following my meeting with the hoteliers and in a preliminary discussion with the Minister of Tourism and as well the Minister of Finance, we all agreed to undertake a review of the loan guarantee program to ensure the timeliness of applications and that we receive the necessary feedback from applicants. So together with the special grant facility in the sum of $50 million, we will be seeing a review of the Tourism Loan Guarantee Program and additionally the Tourism Upgrade Program. So these three initiatives will be important moving forward as we seek to rebuild the tourism sector post-COVID 2019. Additionally, the Minister of Trade and Finance also indicated injection of $5 million into the Tobago House of Assembly's Enterprise Development Program, and my colleague, Assemblyman Martin Melville Jack, will treat with that issue as well. The members of the chamber, during our initial discussions, they were concerned primarily about the welfare of their employees, indicating that they would have had to lay off a number of persons. And the minister as well indicated that a facility would be in place, and the minister also announced that that support facility managed by the NIB will be launched soon. And in our conversation, the NIB has put out a press release indicating that they will inform the public. So, emanating from our initial discussions with the tourism sector and some of the measures that we proposed And coming out from our initial stakeholder meeting on Monday with both Labour, Tourism, the Tobago chapter of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and other stakeholders, I am indeed heartened by the initiatives outlined by the government and as well as the Assembly. In the Tobago context, and given the fact that we have a number of small and micro enterprises here on the island, and as well given their dependence on expenditure by the Tobago House of Assembly, and as well given the fact that a number of them operate within the tourism sector, we anticipate that there would be some direct and immediate fallout, and that they would be negatively impacted. And during our deliberations today, we announced a number of broad measures, and as well, not just holding the consultation, because what we did as well to find out what the impact is, or what is the likelihood or the potential of the COVID-19 impact on our business community. We contacted them directly through the division. We engaged our entrepreneurs and business persons in various sectors, and we received feedback from the agro-processing sector, tourism-related services, and the fashion industry. And again, tourism emanating from our discussions with our entrepreneurs, the tourism sector again, they were directly impacted. Now, we received an indication that the estimate will be over 5,000 persons in the tourism industry, that they will be directly impacted by the issues related to COVID and economic fallout. And we're talking about not just persons in the hotels, we're dealing with tour operators, persons who are in destination and wedding planning, car rentals, restaurants, persons who undertake event planning, and persons in other related industry. And just to put it in context, if we look at some of the recent numbers, from 2018 to 2019, we saw an 8.2% increase in stay-over arrivals, moving from a total of just over 18,000 to just under 20,000 in 2019. And the tourism agency indicated an increasing trend into January 2020, where stay-over arrivals increased by 21.8% when you compare January 2018 with 2020. And all things point to a positive year for the tourism industry. But from February 2020, the hotels indicated that they started receiving some of the negative calls. And following my meeting with the hoteliers, they indicated that a number of them would be closing their doors during this week. And so we continue to work with them. So following the comprehensive stimulus package outlined by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance to address the crisis, both using fiscal and monetary policy to stabilize the impact on the economy, to instill a greater degree of business confidence in the economy, we in the Tobago context, we have an important role to play. And therefore, during our deliberations at the Executive Council, we outline a number of measures. One, in treating with the direct costs to cover COVID or the health-related costs, we will be seeking additional funding to cover it to the tune of $45 million is our first estimate. We will continue to work with our clients during our loan programs. And again, my colleague, Ms. Martin Melville Jack, will elaborate on that in detail as well. We will seek as well to expedite the payments to our suppliers and contractors, especially most of them in small and medium-term enterprises. So we'll be expediting the payments of our commitments over the coming week. Additionally, we agreed to the deferral of rental fees for tenants of properties managed by the Tobago House of Assembly, properties that are owned and managed by the Tobago House of Assembly, including the Cove Eco Industrial and Business Park, the Milford Road Esplanade, micro centers at Calder Hall, Argyle and Signal Hill, and as well our beach facilities, such as Pigeon Point and other places. We are going to expand our emergency social assistance program with the acquisition of additional cards. We will enhance our social safety net support mechanism to ensure that our programs are robust enough and that there's dovetailing between the national programs and the programs by the Tobago House of Assembly to ensure greater efficiency and synergy in the delivery of these programs. Additionally, a commitment was given by the Minister of Finance to ensure that foreign exchange was readily available to our Tobago entrepreneurs during this crisis. We'll continue to have those deliberations and to ensure that we receive the necessary report as it relates to the supply of Forex in Tobago. The Consumer Affairs Department has started and will continue on a weekly basis to monitor prices across the island to ensure that we reduce price gouging and to ensure that that we monitor what is happening as it relates to prices. We are compiling a database, and although we are using moral suasion to ensure that persons and businesses practice as part of their corporate social responsibility and to be fair even in the midst of crisis. And I know some goods, as we have been informed, would have to be air freighted in. We are asking persons in the business community to be fair and again to practice corporate social responsibility. And as I've said before, we are compiling a database and we would inform the public later on when we find instances where businesses use this period to inflate prices. And I spoke about the tourism loan facility, which we would again meet with the relevant ministers to ensure the speedy execution. Additionally, the Tobago House of Assembly, in order to provide supply chain support to some of the business persons in Tobago, and given the fact that they have limited warehousing and storage space, we would, and as we seek to ensure that we have an adequate supply of food on the island and to minimize as well inventory shortages, we are providing, in the first instance, 70,000 cubic feet of cold storage space at Tikoswaf, and we will be providing 10,000 square feet of dry storage space to supermarkets and agro-processors rent-free for a period of 3 months in the first instance. And again, this will ensure adequate food supplies, and we have a stock of adequate food supplies on the island. And additionally, as another measure of enhancing food security on the island, and the minister the Prime Minister would have announced the distribution of seeds, seedlings, and other planting materials to farmers and households. And what we are looking as to the availability of our tissue culture lab in the Division of Agriculture, and we would supplement the seed distribution as well from the Minister of Agriculture. And in the first instance, we are hoping that our farmers and our subsistence farmers would take up the challenge and in the short term produce short-term crops, so that again we would be ensuring our food security here on the island. So ladies and gentlemen, I think I will end here and I will take your questions later, but this is just a snapshot of part of our deliberations today at the Executive Council. And after this press briefing, a subcommittee of the Executive Council will be meeting right after to formulate additional policies, and next week, or today's Wednesday, early next week, we will be reporting to Tobago and to the nation the issues agreed to by the Executive Council. I thank you.
Pleasant good afternoon to the members of the listening and viewing public. Pleasant good afternoon to you, members of the media. As Secretary of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labour, this afternoon I'm pleased to report to you from the perspective of labour and micro-enterprise. The Tobago House of Assembly, being the largest employer on the island, is very concerned about the health and well-being of its employees and their dependents in light of the global threat of COVID-19. In addition to the precautionary measures that were announced by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the Division of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labour has recently developed a policy geared to prevent the spread of the virus in workplaces. And it was only a few hours ago that the Executive Council met and was asked to adopt this policy as a model to be used throughout the divisions of the THA, with slight adjustments for their own unique work environment. So I'll proceed to give you just a few highlights of this policy. This policy is divided into 5 major areas. 1, reducing traffic flow through the divisions and the tracing of possible contacts. 2, prevention of mass gatherings in adherence to social distancing. 3, adherence to the World Health Organization's guidelines. 4, support for staff members. And 5, provision for the high-risk members of staff. So I'll start with the first, which is reducing the traffic flow through the division. And this policy is suggesting the enforcement of a visitor's logbook, and this is to be used by security personnel who will ensure that all visitors to the division, and we are talking about those visits that are absolutely necessary, what we will record in the logbook would be the name, identification card numbers, and the nature of the visit, as well as the address and contact information of the visitor, the time they visited and the time they left. Now, this is in addition to what normally happens at divisions, because now that we are in this pandemic, we may be called upon to assist in contact tracing. So the adherence to this guideline will assist greatly in ensuring that we are able to contact those persons that we need to contact at any point in time. However, we want to emphasize that unless it is absolutely necessary, that the public refrain from visiting divisions. We want to suggest the utilization of mobile consultations, call. And if possible, if the call does not give you the kind of satisfaction that you require, then and only then should you pay a visit to the relevant division. As far as the prevention of mass gatherings, we are suggesting that all divisions close their public facilities, all those that they own and those that are maintained by the division, and redeploy the staff that works within those divisions. We are also requesting that the relevant personnel post the public advisories wherever on Facebook and the public media so that persons wishing to access these facilities will be forewarned. Those staff members that worked in those facilities can then be redeployed in the main office. And I'm saying that very guardedly because we don't want to encourage mass gatherings. So it will be done on a phased basis or on a shift basis. We should also rearrange workspaces to maintain that social distance where possible. We are also asking that sanitation workers that are assigned to these facilities, when they are rostered at the main office, that they be educated on the proper use of their PPEs as well as how they should sanitize the public facility carefully. There should be no mass gathering anywhere. Gathering should be 10 persons and under. So we are encouraging all divisions to employ the shift basis of work in cases where persons cannot work from home. And this was discussed only today at the Executive Council, and the model that seems to be accepted by most divisions is 8 to 12 and 12 to 4. That way you would have fewer members of staff in any department at any time. We're also suggesting the cancellation of all training programs that may have been on the agenda within divisions. I'm just giving you a snapshot, so I'm not going to go into all the details. So I move on to number 3, adherence to the World Health Organization's guidelines. And you know them as well as we do. Hand washing. What can divisions do to encourage that? We suggest the installation of hand washing stations at the entrance of your buildings. We are also requesting the placement of hand sanitizer dispensers throughout the building. We cannot emphasize the awareness program. So the placement of posters would become very necessary at all strategic locations throughout your offices. And these posters will give information on hand washing, sanitizing, and preventative measures that should be taken. Similar awareness material should be shared on division monitors in the lobby if you have them. And in the cases of the THA divisions that employ members of OSH, that's these health and safety officers, we are asking that those officers be used in the education of staff, sensitizing them on the way the virus is spread and the preventative measures that should be taken. We are also requesting that touch points be reduced. And one way of doing this is by keeping all doors of the divisions open as much as possible, so that officers moving in and out would not necessarily have to touch doorknobs or door handles. However, weekly, daily, rotational sanitation should be a regularly rostered for the cleaning staff. So you will have cleaning staff on duty throughout the day, but they would be rostered. All right, I'm going to move on to number 4, support for staff members, and this, I think, is critical. Members of staff who have young children and do not have the support system to care for their children as a result of the closure of school should be given the option to work from home or to work on a shift basis with the approval of the administrator. And I know when I say that, one question that will come up would be pandemic leave. So let me answer that question right away before you ask it. Pandemic leave is not yet official. The recommendations are still before the FNGP, and by the end of the day, we should have some information from them. So far, they are awaiting responses or further issues coming from the private sector and labor. So as soon as those situations are ironed out, we would have a ruling on pandemic leave. Okay? Support for staff, where alternative work arrangements can be made. The employees are to be allowed to stay at home with his or her children. Notice I'm saying his or her, without being penalized, whether it's by disciplinary action or non-payment of salaries. We're also asking employees that if they are not sick, please do not stay at home, because we want the work of the division to be carried on as much as possible. Children are not allowed to be in workplaces, and all staff who are working from home must provide their email address and phone number so that they can be contacted at any time during working hours. And finally, number 5, provision for the high-risk members of staff. Now, when we say high risk, we are talking about those members of staff who may be suffering with HIV/AIDS, cancer, asthma, diabetes, sickle cell, or any kind of blood disorder, tonsillitis, leukemia, as the case may be. And these high-risk members of staff, as we know, can contract this disease more readily than others. They are the vulnerable members of staff among us. So these persons should be encouraged to work from home. And in the case where they may not have the provisions which would allow them to work from home, we are suggesting that they still remain at home in order to minimize the risk. All staff working from home, as I said before, must provide the information that is required so that work can be sent to them anytime during the working hours. I will now move quickly on, and I would not be very long, to another aspect of our discussions at Executive Council meeting this morning, which dealt with small and micro enterprises. And as I said, I will not go into a lot of detail because my colleague, Mr. Jack, said to you a while ago that a committee has been formed to work out the intricate details of this plan. So I'm just going to give you in broad details. So we have agreed that the grant and loan program that is currently under our division as a feature of the Business Development Unit will be increased to a maximum of $50,000 for the grants and $500,000 for the loans. Now, during this 6-month period, April to September, grants will now include capital. And I'm saying that because before you were given a grant for working capital. Before, we would have given a grant specifically for equipment, primarily equipment for the business, but now we will include working capital. The details are yet to be worked out, but that I can confirm at this point in time. We are also looking at a deferral of loan payments for existing clients, existing loan clients, for a period of 6 months. Now, anyone taking out a loan at this point in time will be privileged to have a waiver on their loan repayment for 6 months in the first instance. I'm talking now about new loans, okay? All other lending policies will apply, and you will be given details about these policies at a later date, sometime next week, as the Secretary for Finance said. Now, our main focus for these grants and loans would be businessmen or prospective businessmen involved in agro-processing, any kind of food production, light manufacturing of cleaning products, etc. The things that relate directly to ensuring that not just business continues, but that the products, if for want of a better word, that will be in high demand during this period of uncertainty continues. And finally, I think this may have been mentioned before, but I will say it again, the rental properties are our micro centers, which falls under the remit of the BDU. So those are our 3 micro centers. We would defer the rental payments for 3 months in the first instance. So I thank you at this time. Any other information will be forthcoming in the near future. Thank you.
Chief Secretary, the other members of the Assembly, members of the media, residents of Tobago, and citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by extension, good afternoon. Of course, when we examine the facts and the data of this COVID-19 pandemic, it is definitely a global challenge. Almost 500,000 cases across 172 countries in the world, almost 21,000 deaths. And of course, the Chief Secretary gave the data with respect to Trinidad and Tobago. But more than those facts and more than the data with respect to cases and deaths, all of us must pay attention to the impact on the economy. And more specifically, I want to deal with today the impact on lives and our people here in Tobago, and of course the response of the Assembly to those challenges faced by our people. Because I'm saying to us, this crisis is the greatest threat to the Caribbean economy, which of course we are a part of since the global financial crisis of 2008. But I'm comforted of the response thus far by, of course, the central government led by the Prime Minister, and of course the Tobago House of Assembly led by the Honorable Chief Secretary. And therefore we are in good hands as a country and as an island going forward as we battle this crisis. I am of the firm belief, and I'm sure all of us would share the same belief, that we can in fact defeat, and we will defeat COVID-19. And therefore we have had responses thus far from the private sector, it's not COVID, the voluntary sector, and of course the state. So far, a number of announcements have been made with respect to the banks, interestingly, I received a call from my bank offering a 3-month moratorium on my loan payments. And therefore, this will be offered across the board to citizens of this country and, of course, residents of Tobago. And my information is that all the banks thus far have been offering their customers moratoriums on loan payments, lowered interest rates on credit cards and loans, etc. From the perspective of the voluntary sector, I've seen where media personalities here in Tobago have already begun the process to render assistance to our school children here in Tobago who, of course, are out of school. And those kinds of efforts must be congratulated and encouraged. And therefore, in that context, I want to further challenge the other NGOs, and I'm sure many of them have already begun to mobilize to render the necessary support to our people, not just here in Tobago, but across the country. But specifically the churches who are asked at this point in time to not gather and to not have services. I am sure this presents an opportunity for them as well to mobilize, of course in groupings of less than 10, to render the necessary humanitarian support to our people here in Tobago and the country by extension. But of course, we as a Tobago House of Assembly have a responsibility to give support to our people. And we want to ensure two things. One, that every individual that is affected by this crisis, that they have food on the table every single day. In addition to that, we want to ensure that people not only stay at home, but also keep their homes. And therefore, while the banks are doing their part to give moratoriums on loan payments, which applies to mortgages as well, from the perspective of the Assembly, the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development, we are prepared to give support for those persons who find themselves in trouble with rental payments, and therefore that support will mirror the same policy announced by the central government of $2,500, a maximum of $2,500 per month for 3 months in the first instance. And I will say that that process, that program, is an existing one within the division, and therefore we are prepared to give that support almost right away. With respect to the food support program, through the Ministry of Social Development, of course, there is an office here in Tobago that is responsible for that program, and at this point in time, we are working out the logistical details to ensure that our people here in Tobago can access that support, and of course it's going to range from $510 to $800 per month. In addition to that, I think we all are aware that existing food cards will be topped up. Disability grants and other public assistance grants will also be topped up during this crisis. And therefore, we in the Tobago House of Assembly are doing what we ought to do to ensure that our people receive the kind of support and the kind of income replacement. And of course, not to forget the NIB situation, where through the National Insurance Board, persons will have the opportunity to receive $1,500 per month through that salary replacement grant. And of course, those are persons who will suffer directly as a result of retrenchment or losing jobs, to be more specific. So of course, we are doing our part. We continue to encourage all of us, even members of the private sector. I am aware that in some cases, retrenchment or laying off has begun, but I'm also appealing to some of those persons, some of those businesses who can afford it, right, to maintain at least some level of employment. or if retrenchment is a must, then maybe a situation where persons receive 50% of their salary might go a long way in assisting us here in Tobago. So of course we continue to do our part to ensure that the people of Tobago receive the necessary support from the Tobago House of Assembly as we deal with this crisis. Thank you very much.
Okay, members of the press, you can ask your questions at this time.
Elizabeth Williams, TV6. What I wanted to find out straight ahead from Mr. Dennis is how do residents of Tobago go about getting this rental assistance that you are speaking about, like immediately?
Right, so I forgot to mention that we still working out two things. One is the staffing arrangements, because of course we expect that a number of persons will try to access this support. So hopefully by Monday we should be making an announcement and putting information out there with respect to the establishment of a hotline where persons can call, because we prefer persons to call and set an appointment instead of, flooding the office in a situation where we should be exercising social distancing.
Where this office is located?
Right, so we're working out the logistics. Of course, the direct support from the division will be accessed from Habib Building, but again, I am appealing to the people of Tobago, do not flock to the office at this point in time. We prefer to have a situation where appointments are made. So at this point in time, we're putting together all the logistics. The hotline should be established very soon, and the information will be placed into the public domain so that people could call and establish appointments so that they could come in with the necessary documentation, and the support or the grants will be processed in a timely manner.
Just to add to that, in terms of ensuring that when the persons in fact do come to the respective office, they are aware of some of the documentation required. So a letter of termination from their place of employment is one they should work with, because this is an attempt to validate that they have been retrenched on the basis of what is happening. Their national ID card, a picture of the or photo of the national ID card of the landlord. They are likely to be required to sign a statutory declaration. And they would need to work with some proof that they are in fact renting and have been renting the premises for at least a period of time.
Okay. And Mr. Chief Secretary, will non-nationals also be afforded this?
These benefits are for nationals of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. All right. In terms, this question is for Mr. Jack. In terms of the food cards, the food card situation, what is happening for persons immediately who are in need of food? I know a number of NGOs have joined forces in terms of distributing food on a daily basis. But what is in train now immediately to feed residents of Tobago for persons to get food? What I have received so far is that some people who went to sign up for the food card was told that it will be available in May, but people are hungry now.
I'm not sure how accurate that is, but we have stock of food cards on hand. We have made, I've gotten approval today by the Executive Council to order an additional batch, so persons can receive food cards on a monthly basis immediately. And persons who are part of the program would have been in receipt of their food cards for April, they would have to apply for May. So food cards are available at this moment.
So persons who are now signing up will have to wait for May?
No persons can get their
because
food.
Someone went actually yesterday and they were told, come back in May. They were denied that food card.
Well, I'm uncertain if you can give me the person name and number afterwards.
I can.
But the information is that we're looking at a very quick turnaround within a week, at least 4 days from application to when the persons will be called out. So 1 week, within a week, persons will be able to be in receipt of a food card. So that information, so just to clarify and to let persons know exactly what the accurate information is, and that they will have to, as we have criteria established by the Ministry of Social Development, there is criteria as well to access the food card, and persons will have to walk with the requisite documentation. But the food cards are available.
Okay. In terms of, you would have said that a number of hotels will be closing in the coming days. Do you have a list of those hotels? And if you cannot reveal the names of these hotels, do you have like a number?
Well, my initial discussions prior to the meeting on Monday and previously, and I indicated this last Thursday, that at last Thursday's press conference, the occupancy levels at hotels across the island hovered around 10%. At our meeting on Monday, I had representatives of Cocoa Reef and others, and they indicated that they will be closing. Mr. Chris James, who was also part of that meeting, indicated that a lot of the hotels will be closing as well. So in terms of the total number, I can get that for you. But in attendance at the meeting as well was the CEO of the tourism agency, and he has also been having feedback as it relates to the occupancy levels. As I indicated, the persons, the hoteliers, they were concerned about the welfare of their employees because they indicated at the meeting on Monday that they would have had to terminate a number of their employees. And just to clarify a point that I made as it relates to the salary relief grant, I hesitated to say next week. I know my colleague very well. He gave me the assurance next week. But in terms of a specific date, that is by Monday, March 30th, although Monday is a holiday, probably the day after that, the grant will be in operation. Okay, so just to let persons know, the salary relief grant operated by the NIB, and this follows, I'm reading from an official press release from the Ministry of Finance.
Okay. At one particular supermarket in Tobago, it's being said, and a customer would have placed it, I'm sure you saw it on social media, where you have to spend at least $600 in order to get rice. I know you said that there's going to be naming and shaming in terms of price gouging, but how soon will the Tobago House of Assembly, through your division in terms of consumer affairs, be naming and shaming and putting it out there so that customers would be able to know, shop here, don't go there, these are the price comparatives?
Well, the staff, they are currently in the field at the moment compiling the report. I anticipate that I will get a weekly report. In terms of putting the information out there, we don't have a timeline as yet, but that will be based on the submission of the report from the officers in the field. So I await their information, but I am in discussions with a number of the supermarket owners across the island, and they have assured me that they have sufficient stock on hand, and they are receiving orders from their distributors in Trinidad, and I know a number of them are ensuring that we have more than an adequate supply of food stock on the island. So as it directly relates to your question, I anticipate that I'll have a first report on hand, if not Friday, early the next week, because it's they're compiling the information on a weekly basis.
Okay, thank you so much.
Camille McKechnie, Guardian Media. Mr. Chief Secretary, there's an article making the rounds from England that it's indicating that British tourists were accosted in Tobago and prevented from leaving. Have you seen that article, one? And is there any truth to it? It said that most of the holiday makers were over 60. Have you heard about any kind of confrontation between tourists and police in Tobago?
You have the source of the article?
Yes. It's Daily Mail Online. I would send it to you.
Okay, yeah, you could send it for me. I will inquire into it. Does it suggest that the altercation was with the police?
The police were called in after there was an altercation with the hotel manager.
All right, so I would look into that.
All right, Mr. Jack, you talk about Tikoswaf, those people, are they renting from the THA? When you talk about deferred payment, does it mean that they would not be paying rent? They would be paying a decreased rent? Or how many months would they be?
It's part of a skip a rent program for 3 months in the first instance, should the business require the support from the assembly. So we are deferring the loan payment. All right, so if you, for example, if you're unable to pay March, April, and May, we would push those payments further along and give persons the opportunity, once their businesses rebound, to pay the rent, to make their rent payments later on. It's similar to the skipper payment announced by the banks and the TTMF and other companies, because of the fact that we have to practice social distancing, because of the fact as well a number of the bars and businesses, they have to close. There's an issue of loss of earnings and loss of income. So making this provision available directly to facilities owned and operated by the Tobago House of Assembly. All right.
Mr. Chief Secretary, we know now you like to talk about business unusual. Yes, we're going through a worldwide crisis, but there's also the situation in Tobago where you indicated that at the end of next month you will no longer be in office. Have there been any discussions about it? Are you going to be remaining in office?
At this point, there has been no discussion concerning an extension. But of course, if there is an extension, just as I faced the media and indicated the timeline, I shall also do that. So let not your heart be troubled.
Okay, I just want an indication when we're going to get this information, because this is actually trending online about Tobago and has the capacity to destroy Tobago's economy based on tourism.
What has the capacity?
No, I'm talking about the article. The article itself is trending online and has been widely...
Oh, you mean the article
yes,
on
so I just want your assurance that you're going to give me, you'll be able to give us...
The article coming from Daily Mail?
Yes.
Okay,
you'll be able to give us...
I'll look into it as
I know,
as
because
possible.
I know lots of times you're not as responsive and you take a couple of days. So I'm asking in front of everybody, and everybody could bear me out here that, so
But you would appreciate that when I provide you with accurate information, which is what is critical.
But not timely. And in this scenario, we need it to be timely.
The issue of timely, as you would appreciate, especially if one has to get the information from other sources, yes, would involve one waiting on the information, and then the information is put out there. So timely, as you would readily appreciate, is subjective.
Okay, thank you.
You're most welcome.
Good evening. Question to Secretary Joel Jack. You mentioned that $45 million was being sought in the fight against COVID. Could you identify any specific areas which that funds might be sought? And just to elaborate a bit about that.
Well, I don't have the detailed budget as yet. It's an estimate provided by the division, but I don't have the details, and we're working out the budget. And you can appreciate that the situation is quite... and the uncertainty, and it's fluid, and we have to put certain measures in place. We have to ensure that we have the necessary PPE and drugs and ventilators and all the necessary things in place. And we also have to house a number of persons who are on quarantine as well. And we have to ensure that the health system is ready and prepared, because You see what is happening in Italy. You see what is happening in Spain. We see what is happening in the US. And a number of countries have implemented serious lockdowns and quarantine and severe measures. India recently took some harsh decisions. I was just looking at the BBC before coming to the press conference. South Africa as well. And the UK as well has taken a decision to recruit an additional 11,000 retired health professionals to bring them back into the system. And this really highlights the challenge before us as a society and some of the steps and measures that we need to put in place. And we are putting all the measures in place. And I want to thank Secretary of Health and all the health professionals who are at the forefront of this battle. Dr. Hoyt is here. I'm not sure what energy drink or vitamin she's taking, but I'll have to get a prescription afterwards. But to commend them for the work that they are doing thus far. But it just highlights the level of expenditure. We have to be prepared. We have to take the necessary measures, and we have to ensure that the necessary funding is available.
Good afternoon, Akin Labihola, Channel 5 News. This goes to Secretary Melville Jack. You mentioned the precautions or the recommendations for staff within the Assembly. One thing I didn't hear you mention, and I just want to know about it, is that would you be asking all, or would the Assembly be asking all non-essential staff to the operations as is to stay home, since that is a recommendation by the government and the World Health Organizations and all these?
But that was not discussed, but then that was not a point for discussion. But then who would you consider to be non-essential?
Well, that would have to be an assessment by the Assembly, because you stated that all trainings would be off, all public spaces would be closed and that kind of thing. So I guess those members of staff may not necessarily be needed. So they could be, I guess, depending on how your operations would go from here on out, you could make a determination as who is essential staff and who is not essential staff. And if you don't necessarily need them, do they have to be there, seeing that you also want to talk about social distancing within the workspace, and we know that a lot of these government offices are sort of crammed for space as well?
Well, we did talk about the redeployment of staff, because once you start setting a precedent that members of staff can stay home because they may not be needed, then you're opening a Pandora's box there. We prefer to say redeployment of staff, because we will find avenues in which their services can be of use.
You mind just, what kind of Pandora's box we're talking about?
I leave that one for you to open.
Okay, you also mentioned members of staff, if they have pre-existing conditions. I don't know if you all worked that out as yet, meaning that would members of staff have to disclose their pre-existing condition, or would they just have to say that they have a pre-existing condition? And how do you go about confirming these claims with the whole idea of patient confidentiality of medical records and so forth?
Okay, very good question, and that is one that came up within the executive as well. What I can say is the experience that we have had at the division is that the heads of department seem to be very intimate with the staff in that they are aware of many of their pre-existing conditions, because at many times they have had to seek medical attention and that kind of thing. So we have that kind of information on staff. And I've also realized that members of staff, well, they may not tell you that they have HIV, but anything that will create a threat in the office, whether you have mold or anything like that, they would let you know beforehand. However, what we can add is the presentation of some medical report or certificate which can verify the condition. But members of staff have been very open and willing to disclose their condition, especially with this pandemic situation.
Okay.
But it will be done in an atmosphere where the staff member would indicate to perhaps the head of the department or to the administrator.
Only.
Yes, so that,
Only.
so it allows the confidentiality to be maintained, because as you imply by your question, there would be the need to verify, because you wouldn't want it to be abused. But at the same time, one would want to ensure that those persons who are at greater risk, that efforts are made to minimize the risk to that person's health.
Okay, you all spoke about relief programs, particularly. You spoke about relief programs for persons who need to pay rent and they may become unemployed because of the circumstances we are under. I was wondering, I don't know if I missed it, but I was wondering if you all have some sort of system by which you can assist persons who may not be within the system per se. They're self-employed, or they might not be paying NIS. There might be a hustler on the road or something like that. Because on my way here, one of the guys selling water on the road was complaining, he can't make money anymore because people are not on the road anymore. Those kinds of persons who make their money outside of the system and they are affected by it and they can't make the rent or they can't do other stuff. Is there anything at all to get these persons within some sort of catchment?
Yeah, well, you remember that there is a suite of social welfare activities or benefits that Mr. Dennis alluded to, so they can access those. All right. Of course, when they make the applications, the relevant assessment will be done, because those programs continue. Those programs do not stop. So persons who find themselves in difficulty outside of the mainstream, as you're suggesting, then that facility continues to be open for them.
Okay. That also includes the rent program as well?
Yes.
Okay.
If I may add something with respect to the rental assistance program. That program has been an ongoing one in the Assembly. We have assisted a number of persons, for instance, fire victims, domestic violence victims, and a number of persons who suffer those kinds of adverse circumstances. However, I must add, it is not a situation for persons to take advantage of the system. I had an experience recently where I had to explain to someone who, due to, I would say, personal financial mismanagement, has found themselves behind on their rent since before this COVID-19 crisis. And therefore, this doesn't present an opportunity for persons falling into that kind of situation to advantage the system. It is specifically for persons who are impacted adversely by this COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, thank you. One last question, Mr. Jack. Some persons are concerned that the provisions being given to businesses with the intent of keeping the businesses afloat to maintain employment. They want to know what sort of safeguards or what sort of, is there any kind of agreement between the Assembly and the businesses to maintain the employment. I know you all said you would have appealed to them or something like that, but do you have any other step you are considering?
Well, in addition to the programs, the funding through the Enterprise Assistance Fund and Enterprise Assistance Grant programs, we have the commitment from the business persons through the Chamber and through the Manufacturers Association. And this will be and this can be understandably outside of the tourism sector because we understand the direct impact. And they have agreed to maintain employment levels over the next 4 weeks or so. So we are working together with them. And additionally, you can appreciate the suite of programs and the stimulus package implemented to inject additional liquidity into the system to ensure that persons can refinance their loans, the reduction of the interest rates. And so when taken together, you have an entire stimulus package directed to the to business persons and entrepreneurs. And given as well the fact that we have requested additional funding support through the loan and grant programs, and we'll continue to work with entrepreneurs. And even as we examine what is before us, and as well the uncertainty, we all have to share the burden together. So we're working with the businesses, should they need additional support, and when you look at as well what is provided for the tourism sector, of course, is the sector directly impacted by this crisis, and other sectors, I believe we have provided adequate support. However, we will continue to work with the businesses should there be a need for additional support or additional intervention. But what we have done, I believe, continues to instill confidence into the business community and some excitement that post-COVID 2019, we will see the economic recovery that is anticipated.
So if businesses take the assistance and the grants and all the assistance being given by the Assembly, but yet still not maintain employment levels, is there any action the Assembly will take?
Well, they'll also have to sign a statutory declaration. There'll be an agreement. And you know, once you're in business for the long term. And we anticipate that as law-abiding, God-fearing Tobagonians, we would be honest in this crisis, and that we will ensure, and given the fact that it is public funds, because sometimes, just as it was, I believe, Liz who reported that persons are experiencing challenges accessing the food card, we have put mechanisms in place that when you come to apply for the facility, there's a screening process. So we want to ensure that adequate funding is given to the deserving persons and persons who are serious about business. And what happens at times is we have good intentions as to these programs working and the stimulus package working, and sometimes the deserving are the ones who sometimes they don't get the benefit. But we're hoping that persons will really support us in these initiatives and work with us. One thing I must say, and I want to thank the President of the Tobago Chamber, Ms. Dan Haddad, and Mr. Chris James, President of the Tourism Stakeholder Association. And we continue to work together, and I'm in constant contact with businesses. And Mrs. Martin Melville Jack, through the Business Development Unit, will work with the small and micro entrepreneurs, and as well through our facility in the Division of Finance and the Economy, we will continue to work with those businesses who receive support for lending and our lending support program through the Equity or Venture Capital Equity Fund Limited. So we have a suite and a range of intervention measures, both at the national level and the Assembly, and we believe that they are more than adequate at this time to deal with the issues confronting us.
Okay, this last question is for the Chief. I know, well, the Secretary of Agriculture isn't here, so that's why I'm deferring to you. I know that the Division of Agriculture would have put out a number of protocols to be followed when going to shop at the market. Last weekend, a lot of those protocols were either not implemented or not followed in relation to the number of persons in the market at one time, and as well as trying to encourage persons to practice social distancing while in the market. So my question is, because the market is an essential service, you really can't close on the market unless things get really out of hand. But in the meantime, how do you all want to go about sort of cajoling people to?
Well, we'll continue to appeal. We'll continue to appeal to persons, and that is why I started today's press conference by making a general appeal and pointing out the implications of our behavior in light of what continues to happen in this pandemic situation. I suspect as well, however, if the appeal doesn't work, then we'll have to move to enforce those guidelines. But in the meantime, we are continuing to appeal to persons to operate in accordance with those guidelines.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the next 491.9 FM Tobago, I just have two quick things. Yesterday, Mr. Louis Lewis mentioned that Tobago stands to possibly lose $88 million in business between now and June. And I just want to get some feedback from the panel in terms of that particular figure. You know, has it been explored by the Executive Council as accurate in terms of that particular quantity? $88 million in the space of 6 months, I think, is a reasonably good amount for the country to be making, for the island of Tobago to be making. Has that figure been considered to be accurate, one? And two, has the Executive Council started to look at the way forward past COVID-19 and how we are going to recover this $88 million in the following 6 months?
Quite naturally, the Secretary of Finance, in his presentation, spoke to the issue of business continuity, as well as in respect of the tourism sector in particular, the additional feature of the grant for these operators to use the opportunity to refashion their business and their business model. In addition to which, he did speak as well to the whole idea of revisiting the existing benefits under the Tourism Act and so on. Now, it is precisely because of a recognition, and of course that figure is an estimate, as you would anticipate, based on certain kinds of assumptions, perhaps including but not limited to the projected growth of persons coming internationally and domestic and so on. But it is precisely in recognition of the fact that there will be a drop in the revenue to be earned or incomes to be earned by persons in Tobago, the hoteliers and so on, that the suit of relief, first of all, announced or enunciated by the central government, and secondly, those that you are hearing today in an attempt to jumpstart certain levels of business operations. For instance, we talk about our small and micro enterprise sector. As you know, that is a sector that had begun to show signs of growth, as evidenced by the performance of the sector at exhibitions. We had last year, for example, when we went to TIC and so on. So what you want to encourage persons to do, notwithstanding the fact that they may have limited cash flow because of less purchasing power now and so on, is to ramp up their businesses and their manufacturing enterprises, because this is the right time to do it. So we are seeking to treat with the opportunity cost by reference to, one, providing relief, and two, targeting the relief in such a way so that certain kinds of business enterprises continue to operate and operate in a particular way. The sector that will be hardest hit was the tourism sector. We are saying that in the moment and continuing for a little while, there is this facility that you can use to refurbish your business, and they're making it ready again for when the time would have come. We're not sure yet. As we ramp up our marketing and so on, once people start to travel again. Because you'll appreciate that even when this thing comes to an end, there may be a certain kind of reluctance at first to travel, but it will eventually pick up.
Additionally, what your question also has to take into consideration is the resiliency of the tourism sector in rebounding from crises in the past. You remember SARS some years ago, and that had an initial impact on the tourism industry, and the industry again bounced back from the post-SARS pandemic. And that is why we are ensuring that our room stock is really enhanced and prepared for post-COVID-19 and moving forward. Now, in terms of estimating and quantifying the impact across all sectors, the Division of Finance, we're currently looking at the estimates and impact on the island GDP. Our initial estimate for 2019 moving into 2020 was that increase in GDP growth of 1.1% for 2019 and continued positive growth for 2020. But in the face of the SARS pandemic and its direct impact on the tourism sector, which contributes approximately 13% of the island's GDP, we are estimating the likely impact. So currently we are crunching the numbers, and we will also compare the data coming out from the agency, because with an estimate, what is important in computing the figure is really the expenditure by tourists on the ground, and we're currently looking at our GDP data and as well comparing the data from the tourism agency, and we working collaboratively to inform policy formulation and the intervention by the Tobago House of Assembly.
All right, and well, I suspect we're looking like we're running out of time. I see we may wrap up in a bit, so I'll just squeeze in this last one here. There is the question of the gratuity payments that were supposed to be settled, I believe, at a press conference that we would have had last week. Discussion was made that that particular gratuity issue would be addressed, and I think the members of the media are interested to find out, has it been, when will it be, is there progress, and that kind of thing.
Which gratuity issue?
With the teachers, I believe it was? Public servants in general. Public servants in
But
general.
we have indicated that in respect of this year's budget, there is a line item for gratuity. So gratuities are being processed and paid. What is happening as well is that because there has been a backlog, what you're having is that we're starting and come forward. Yeah, but gratuities are being honored. But there's a process that we must take note of. Gratuity, when one finishes one contract period, there has to be an appraisal. And once there is a good appraisal, then the process kicks in the sense that the computation takes place. Then that has to be audited. And then the Inland Revenue comes into focus because they have to clear you that you don't owe the state any tax. And then payment is made.
I think
So
the reason the question, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
I think the reason the question would have came up was because of the PAYE payments, the VAT payments that the finance minister would have promised to be paid. And I think some people are of the impression that these gratuity payments will also fall into that category of payments from the government that they are trying to expedite.
Well, if you're talking about public servants and other contract workers, we're saying that there is provision already existing for the payment of those.
Okay, a question that keeps coming up all the time is from persons who said that they have surgeries that were scheduled. They understand the situation and those surgeries were put off. But they're asking why it is no assessment has been done about patients. Like in one case, one man says that he has a problem with his intestines. If he does not get that surgery, he would die. In another case, a woman said she had a C-section and she needs to get another she needs to have some other procedure done. Thank you. And if she does not get it, she would be badly off. So people are asking online, what is the THA doing? Are you all assessing people based on their needs, or is it that everything has been closed and until further notice?
Well, I don't know that all surgeries have been closed until further notice. I did see the TRHA, I think, put out an advisory But I think what was missing from that advisory, and I did bring it to the attention of both the chairman and the medical chief of staff, that the options available should have been enunciated in that advisory as well. But now that you have raised that again and saying that it is an issue, I shall communicate with both persons and as well as the Secretary of Health to make sure that we treat with that, because once there are urgent surgeries required, then we'll have to do that. And as you raised that, I think one of the challenges that we do have, and that is why we're seeking to ensure and we're taking some of the robust decisions that we have been taking to minimize and contain the spread of COVID-19, is that unlike our colleagues in Trinidad and the minister who spoke about a parallel health service, we have one hospital. And if we allow that the situation of COVID to get to the point where that hospital is swamped, then it means it has implications for other kinds of medical conditions. So that is why we're operating in the way. And therefore, as we seek to enforce some of the things that we have decided upon, I trust that the media would help us in that regard, because it's critical to ensure that these things continue to operate as that.
Like
but we will treat with that.
Like in this person's case, she says that the person has a problem with their large intestine, a serious infection, and the operation was due before, but nobody called to say anything, so he's at home in serious pain, and nobody's answering the phone to say anything.
All right.
So it's a matter of life and death.
And as I just indicated to you, I shall bring that to the attention of the medical chief of staff as well as the chairman of the TRHA, so that those persons would need to be advised as to what the options are.
Members of the media head table, we do have to wrap up shortly, but I just want to take a couple of the online questions and give persons the opportunity. We won't be able to take all. One of them to you, Chief Secretary and Secretary of Education, in terms of the school feeding program and persons being provided with meals, would the private schools be included in that?
Well, there are private schools that are currently, or that before the schools were asked to close or ordered to close, who were benefiting from the school feeding program. So that those principals ought to have been, and I could double check to make sure that they were, contacted as well to provide the names of the students and their parents, the names of the students who are most needy in those schools, because they would be facilitated as well. If there are young ones outside of that arrangement, then remember there's always been the social support coming out of the division welfare section that deals with what kinds of grants and so on are given, food support for the parents and so on, and the number of children and all of that. But I shall double check to ensure that those private schools that were benefiting from the school feeding program, that in fact those principals were invited to provide the details.
Okay. Secondly, to Secretary of Finance, Assemblyman Joel Jack, you indicated that you met with the tourism and business sectors on Monday. One, was this a follow-up meeting? And two, what was different from the one on Friday?
Well, the one on Friday was a brief meeting between the ministers of central government and the THA with the wider business community. My meeting followed on the heels of that meeting, and it was a 2-hour session where we were able to get additional recommendation and views coming out from the business community in some detail, and that recommendation was also included in my submission to the Minister of Finance and the central government. You may recall that I'm also part of the cabinet-appointed subcommittee on finance, and most of the details that were announced on Monday came from some of the recommendations and meetings with the stakeholders. So we just expanded on it and provided a bit more detail. And let me thank the ministers of finance and the minister of trade and industry, and Minister Alison West for their support, and as well Mr. Randall Mitchell, because we have been in constant communication to ensure that the necessary feedback from all the stakeholders are included in the government stimulus package, and we're working together to ensure that Tobago and our business persons that they receive the necessary national and support from the Tobago House of Assembly.
I know you did make mention of timelines. There is a question about timelines. I understand that people will be a bit anxious. So the question is, how soon will funding be available? Can you provide a timeline or guidelines?
So the minister is scheduled to be going to Parliament today to take the necessary legislation to fund a number of these initiatives, and the details will be provided, will be forthcoming by the minister very soon. That's as I got the press release as it relates to NIB. With some level of assurance, I can indicate that by next week we will have a rollout as to the mechanisms for application, the agencies who will be responsible, and persons in Tobago can be assured that the relevant agency on the island in Tobago will be directly responsible for the application process, for working with the hoteliers to provide the necessary support mechanisms moving forward.
Thank you very much. As I did say, we aren't able to ask or answer all the questions from online. There were a couple questions. Persons thought they were going to hear presentations, particularly related to COVID-19. We did have a press conference by the Secretary of Health and other healthcare workers yesterday. It would only mean that there wasn't anything new today, but be rest assured that once things come up that are new, there will be other press conferences, and the division will continue to keep you updated and abreast of all that is taking place in the Tobago scenario. I'd like to thank you, members of the media. Thank you to our viewing public. Thank you to our head table for giving us that overarching perspective in terms of the steps and initiatives being taken by the Tobago House of Assembly in one instance, and also in collaboration and conjunction with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. We look forward to hearing more information on things like the policy from the Division of Community Development, and of course more information in terms of the hotline and the office that would be set up that Mr. Ansel Dennis spoke about. We will continue to keep you abreast. I'm just encouraging persons to stay tuned. We have been providing a lot of information, and we will continue to do so through our various platforms, through traditional media,